The morning in suburban San Antonio began with a familiar ritual. I pulled back the thin lace curtains and let the first rays of sunlight into the room. My hands, mottled with wrinkles and age spots, loved the feel of the fabric, a reminder of the times my mother taught me to appreciate nice things. My name is Eleanor Turvey. I am 74 years old, and for the past 6 years I have lived alone in this country house. After 47 years as a court stenographer, I retired and can finally afford what I have dreamed of all my life: silence. People who have never worked in a courtroom don't realize how exhausting it is to listen to other people's problems, conflicts, and dramas for decades. Literally every word spoken in the courtroom passed through my fingers. Sometimes I felt like those words were forever imprinted on my skin like invisible tattoos. Divorce proceedings were especially hard. People who had sworn eternal love to each other turned into bitter enemies. I made myself a mint tea, which I grew in a small bed behind the house. My kitchen is a separate kingdom where everything has its place and purpose. An oak table that I bought at a flea market and restored myself, antique porcelain cups from my grandmother, and a collection of wooden spoons from around the country. With a cup of tea, I stepped out onto the terrace to admire the garden. 6 years ago, when I first moved here, it was just a plot of land with stunted grass. Now, there were three varieties of roses: lush hydrangeas and perennial phlox. A small pond with lilies attracted dragonflies and small birds. All this was created by my hands. Each plant was planted with love and care. Life in the suburbs has its advantages. There is no city bustle. The air is clean, and the neighbors are far enough away not to interfere, but close enough for friendly communication. Truth be told, this is where I first realized what true friendship without commitment is. My closest neighbors are the Hobbs family, an elderly couple who live 3 houses down from me. Gideon Hobbs is a former history professor, and his wife Kathleen is a former botanist. She is the one who helped me plan the garden and taught me the basics of gardening. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Kathleen and I have a tradition of going to the local farmers market together. Today was a Tuesday, and I decided to make my famous lemon muffin for the trip. Kathleen always said it reminded her of her childhood in Georgia. As I was kneading the batter, I couldn't help but think of the call I got from my daughter yesterday. Vanessa calls me about once every 2 weeks, usually on Mondays, and our conversations are rarely pleasant. Vanessa was born when I was 32. Her father, my ex-husband Raymond, left us when she was only 5 years old. I raised her alone, combining work and motherhood. Maybe I wasn't the perfect mother. Too tired from work, too demanding, too concerned with financial problems. But I always tried to give her everything she needed. When Vanessa turned 28, she married Orlando Calloway, a man with a questionable reputation and a huge ego. From the beginning, he treated me condescendingly, as if I was incapable of understanding his great ideas. "That's last century, Eleanor," he was fond of saying, rolling his eyes when I expressed my opinion on anything. Their wedding was the first major stumbling block between us. Orlando insisted on a lavish celebration that neither he nor Vanessa could afford. When I suggested a more modest ceremony, he accused me of being stingy and hinted that I should sell my house in the city to pay for their party. Of course, I refused, and since then, our relationship with my son-in-law has never been warm. After that incident, Vanessa began to gradually distance herself from me. She called and visited less and less often, and when she did show up, she was cold and irritated. I felt like she blamed me for the fact that their wedding wasn't what Orlando wanted. Yesterday's conversation with my daughter was particularly tense. Vanessa informed me that she and Orlando were planning to buy a new car, even though I knew they were still paying off the loan on the previous one. When I gently asked if that was financially prudent, she replied sharply, "Mom, not everyone lives their lives saving every dime like you do." We want to enjoy life. Those words hit me deeper than she could have imagined. Yes, I had been saving all my life, but only to ensure that Vanessa and I had stability, that she could get a good education, that we would always have a roof over our heads. And now that I could finally afford a small luxury in the form of a country house, it was seen as something shameful. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. Kathleen stood at the door with a basket of fresh berries. "Good morning, Eleanor. I picked some blackberries and thought I'd share them with you. They are especially juicy this year." I invited her into the kitchen and offered her a cup of tea. Kathleen, with her penetrating gaze, immediately noticed my mood. "What's wrong? You look upset." "Vanessa called yesterday," I answered, pulling out the cups. "Another conversation about how I didn't know how to enjoy life." Kathleen shook her head understandingly. Unlike many, she never gave unsolicited advice on how I should handle my relationship with my daughter. Instead, she just listened, and for that, I was especially grateful. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "my oldest daughter also went through a phase of rejecting everything we taught her. But over time, she came back to family values. In my case, I'm not sure it's a phase. It's been 10 years since Vanessa got married, and every year the chasm between us only grows." "But you're not giving up, are you?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, of course not. I've just learned to live my life without expecting approval. After all, I've lived for others for too long. First for my parents, then for my husband, then for my daughter. Now my time belonged to me alone." After Kathleen left, I decided to take a walk to the local library. The small Victorian-style building was one of my favorite places in the area. The librarian, Pearl Simmons, a woman my age with a surprisingly sharp mind, always recommended interesting books to me. "Eleanor," she exclaimed when she saw me, "I've put aside the new Pembroke novel for you. I think you'll like it." Pearl was one of the few people who understood my love of detective novels. For me, they were an extension of my work. Only now I could just watch the story unfold, not write down every word. "How are your grandchildren?" I asked, accepting the book. "Oh, they are growing up so fast. The older one is already in college. Can you believe it? And the younger twins just started first grade this year." Pearl pulled her phone out of her pocket and showed me some recent photos. I felt a slight pang of envy. Vanessa didn't have kids, and it didn't look like she and Orlando were planning on having any. The thought that I would never be a grandmother sometimes crossed my mind on particularly lonely evenings. Back home, I decided to work in the garden. Weeding the beds of carrots and lettuce always helped me get my thoughts in order. The earth beneath my fingers felt warm and alive, reminding me of the eternal cycle of nature, where withering is always followed by new life. It was in moments like these that I especially appreciated my current life. For decades, I had been tied to a strict schedule, to a specific place, to responsibilities that could not be postponed. Now each day was my own, and I could fill it with whatever brought me joy. As the sun began to sink, I returned to the terrace with a glass of white wine and a new book. Evenings in the suburbs are always filled with special sounds: the chirping of cicadas, the rare cries of night birds, the rustling of leaves in the light wind. It was a symphony of silence that I had learned to appreciate. A phone call broke my peace. Vanessa's name popped up on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded unusually animated. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, thanks. Enjoying an evening in the garden. Listen, I was talking to Orlando about your country house. He's never been there. Can you believe it? I showed him some pictures, and he just loves how beautiful it is." I felt my neck muscles tense up. When Vanessa started a conversation with compliments, it usually ended with some sort of request. "That's nice to hear," I replied carefully. "He says he's always wanted a place to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city," Vanessa continued. You know he has a very stressful job. Orlando worked for a company that organized corporate events. As far as I knew, his job consisted mostly of attending parties and luncheons, which could hardly be called stressful. Yes, I understand, I replied neutrally. We were thinking maybe we could come to your place for the weekend sometime, just to relax, get some fresh air. That's it. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, planning how she would use my house as a free resort. I didn't mind my daughter's visit. Despite our differences, I loved her. But the thought of tolerating Orlando in my personal space made me internally resistant. Of course we could discuss it, I replied diplomatically. When were you thinking of coming? Oh, we haven't set a date yet. Maybe in a couple weeks? I'll get back to you later, okay? After we talked, I sat for a long time looking up at the sunset sky. Something told me that this innocent conversation about a visit could turn into something more. Knowing Orlando, I expected a catch. In the evening, I took a warm bath with lavender salt, another small luxury I allowed myself every day. As I lay in the water, I thought about how much my life had changed in recent years. Retirement is scary for many people. People feel that without a job, they will lose their identity, become useless and lonely. For me, however, it has been liberating. I was finally able to be myself, not a function, not a tool in the hands of the judicial system. I could wake up at any time, go wherever I wanted, read what I was interested in, not what was necessary for work. Of course, there were difficulties. For the first few months, I often woke up with a panicky feeling that I was late for court. Sometimes I caught myself automatically reaching for the stenotype typewriter I no longer had. But gradually these habits gave way to new ones. Morning walks, working in the garden, reading books on the terrace. I wiped myself with a soft towel and put on my favorite cotton pajamas. Everything in the bedroom was prepared for a comfortable sleep. Fresh bed linen with a light scent of lavender, a glass of water on the bedside table, the book I was reading now. Before I went to bed, I remembered tomorrow's trip to the farmer's market with Kathleen and mentally made a list of groceries to buy. This simple routine brought me pleasure, knowing that tomorrow would be filled with small but meaningful events. As I fell asleep, I thought about how amazing life is. When I was young, it seemed to me that real life was career, social status, and relationships. Now I realized that the true value lay in those moments of peace and quiet that I had been unable to afford for so long. After all, independence is not a luxury, but a necessity to truly be myself. The September afternoon was unusually hot for this time of year. I was watering my roses when I heard the sound of an approaching car. By the distinctive roar of the engine, I knew right away that Vanessa had arrived. Her new sports car, which she'd purchased against my advice to save money, was all too recognizable in our quiet suburb. I straightened up, shook the earth off my hands, and headed for the entrance. Vanessa gave no warning of the visit, which was pretty typical for her. In recent years, she'd only shown up at my house spontaneously, as if prearranged meetings gave me too much time to prepare for another confrontation. My daughter stepped out of the car, dressed in what she probably considered casual: designer jeans, a silk blouse, and high-heeled shoes, totally inappropriate for a walk in the garden. Her light brown hair was in a perfect bun, and her makeup looked flawless, as if she were going to a business meeting, not to her mother's house in the country. "Mom," she exclaimed, opening her arms. "You look healthy." It was her typical hello, a semi-compliment that actually contained an implicit criticism. Healthy in her vocabulary meant somewhat overweight and too plain. "Hello, Vanessa." I hugged her, trying not to stain her expensive blouse. "What a surprise. You didn't tell me you were coming." Oh, it was a spontaneous decision. I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting, and I thought, why not visit my mom? Vanessa worked as a consultant for a firm specializing in PR for high net worth clients. She often referred to her workload and important meetings, though I suspected that much of her work was image maintenance for the people who paid her to create the illusion of her own importance. We entered the house, and I noticed Vanessa casting a critical eye over the interior. "Still have those old curtains?" she asked, pointing to my favorite lace curtains. "They look so vintage." "I like them," I replied simply. "Do you want tea or coffee? Do you have anything decaf? I'm on detox right now." I silently pulled out the herbal tea I kept especially for such occasions. Vanessa was always in the midst of some sort of cleanse or detox, following fashion trends that I only learned about from her stories. While I was making tea, Vanessa settled down at the kitchen table, never stopping talking about her busy life. "You won't believe the deal we closed last week. The client is one of San Antonio's biggest real estate developers, and he wants us to completely revamp his public image. Orlando said it could fetch us a six-figure sum." I nodded, pretending to be impressed. I had a hard time believing these promises of six figures, especially since every few months Vanessa or Orlando talked about similar incredible opportunities, but their financial situation seemed to remain precarious. "How's Orlando doing?" I asked, setting the cup in front of her. Vanessa's face brightened, as it always did when it came to her husband. "Oh, he's a hot commodity. You know, last month he was invited to organize a corporate retreat for Metavision. That's that technology company everyone's talking about now. He came up with such a concept that even the CEO personally shook his hand." I listened to her stories, nodding in all the right places and asking questions when it seemed appropriate. It was noticeable that Vanessa was desperate to create an image of a successful couple, despite the obvious contradictions in her narrative. If they were so successful, why did they constantly complain about financial difficulties? Why did every conversation eventually come down to money? "What about your garden?" Vanessa suddenly asked, clearly having exhausted the topic of her accomplishments. "It's thriving. The roses are blooming particularly well this year. Do you want to see?" "Nay, maybe later." She dismissed it and suddenly changed her tone to a more serious one. "Mom, I'm actually here to talk about something important." I tensed inwardly. Usually, such an introduction was either a request for money or a criticism of my lifestyle. "I'm listening," I replied calmly, taking a seat across from her. "It's about Orlando and his family," Vanessa began, stirring her tea nervously. "You know he has a very large family, right? 5 brothers and sisters, all married or married, many with children." "Yeah, you mentioned that. So every year they have a big family gathering. Usually they rent a country house, but this year it's been difficult." I was beginning to see where she was going with this, but I decided to give her a chance to formulate her request. "So, what happened to their usual meeting place?" "It turns out that the owners have decided to sell the house, and now the family tradition is in jeopardy. Everyone is very upset, especially Orlando. He cherishes these meetings so much." Vanessa was silent, as if expecting some kind of reaction from me. I waited patiently for her to continue. "Anyway, I told Orlando about your house," she finally said, "about how spacious it was, with a beautiful garden and everything you need for a vacation. And he thought, we thought, maybe you could have a family reunion here?" That's it. I'd been expecting such a request ever since Vanessa had started praising my house in our phone conversation. But it's one thing to speculate, and quite another to hear it directly. "When are you planning this gathering?" I asked in a neutral tone. "Next month, the third weekend. It's a traditional date for the Kellaway family," Vanessa said, as if it were a well-known fact that I had to memorize. "And how many people usually attend an event like this?" Vanessa wrinkled her nose slightly. "Well, it depends on who can make it. Last year there were about 15 people, not counting the kids." I exhaled slowly. 15 people in my house, my sanctuary, my personal space. 15 Kellaways, each of whom, judging by Orlando, considered themselves the center of the universe. That's quite a lot of people for my house, I remarked. But you have 3 bedrooms, Vanessa objected, and a big living room and a terrace and all that garden. Sure, it'll be a little cramped, but it's a family, Mom. A family can squeeze in. Not my family, I wanted to say, but I held back. Instead, I just sipped my tea and asked another question. What does Orlando think about it? Vanessa's face brightened. Oh, he loves the idea. He says it's the perfect solution. His older brother Torben was particularly interested when he heard about the lily pond. He loves to fish. There are no fish in my pond, I pointed out. It doesn't matter. He'll find something else to do, Vanessa said. And his wife Janina loves gardening, just like you. You'll have a lot to talk about. I listened to Vanessa list all the members of the Kellaway family and their wonderful qualities, imagining the horde invading my quiet, orderly world. Orlando with his loud laughter and tactless jokes. His brother Torben, who, from the stories, was even more cocky and boisterous. The Calloway sisters, Petra and Fiona, with their broods of naughty children. Orlando's parents, Richard and Hilda, who, according to Vanessa, always say what they think, which usually meant they criticize everything and everyone. And then there's Orlando's cousin, Eric, Vanessa continued. He's a little weird, but harmless. He collects bugs and can talk about them for hours. That sounds interesting, I replied politely, though I was panicking inside at the thought of turning my house into a zoo. So, what do you say? Vanessa looked at me with hope mixed with impatience. Can we count on your house for a family reunion? I didn't want to give a categorical answer right away. I needed time to think through all the implications. On the one hand, I wanted to support my daughter and show that I was willing to make concessions for her sake. On the other hand, my gut was telling me that it could be disastrous. I need to think about it, I finally answered. It's a serious request, and I'd like to think about it. Vanessa was clearly disappointed with my answer. Her smile faded slightly, and irritation flashed in her eyes. Mom, you have nothing to think about. It's just for the weekend, 2 days, and everyone will be gone. And you won't even have to do anything. I'll organize everything. I doubted that last statement. Knowing Vanessa and her approach to organization, I'll organize everything usually meant I'll come up with grand plans and you'll implement them and pay for them. However, I'd like to take a break and think things over, I said firmly. This is my house, and I need to make sure I'm ready for this many guests. Vanessa frowned, but then, as if remembering some advice from a psychology book, she took a deep breath and tried to smile. Of course, Mom. I understand. It's just, Orlando is so enthusiastic about the idea. I'd hate to disappoint him. Is it okay to disappoint me? I thought, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I suggested maybe we could think of other options, like renting a bigger house where everyone would be comfortable. But that would be so expensive, Vanessa exclaimed. And your house is already there, and it's perfect. Perfect for me, I said softly. But 15 people plus kids is a whole different scale. We were at an impasse. Vanessa pouted, the way she used to do when she wasn't getting what she wanted as a child. I decided to change the subject. Tell me more about Orlando's parents. Are they planning on coming? It worked. Vanessa perked up and started talking about her in-laws. Oh, Richard and Hilda are quite something. They met in Germany but moved here before Orlando was born. Richard is very proud of his German roots and emphasizes it all the time. He loves order and punctuality and expects the same from everyone around him. And Hilda? Well, she's the kind of woman who thinks she knows how best to run someone else's home and life. Sounds familiar. I said with a slight irony. Vanessa didn't catch the implication and continued, yes, she is always giving advice on everything: how to cook, how to dress, how to raise children. At first, it annoyed me, but then I realized that it was her way of showing concern. Orlando says I should be grateful for her wisdom. I listened and thought about how much Vanessa has changed since she got married. Before, she would never have let someone tell her how to live her life. Now she took such interference for granted, even found excuses for it. How does Hilda feel about you? I asked cautiously. Vanessa tensed slightly. She's very direct. Often says I'm too soft on Orlando, that I should keep a better eye on the house and care more about his comfort. But, she's just trying to help. I felt resentment boiling up inside me. My daughter, an intelligent and once independent woman, was letting her mother-in-law and husband shape her self-esteem and lifestyle. Don't you think sometimes their help can be excessive? I asked as gently as possible. Vanessa abruptly put the cup on the table. That's why I didn't want to talk to you about it. You're always criticizing Orlando and his family. They accepted me. They support me. They showed me what it means to be part of a real family. Her words hurt me deeper than she could have imagined. A real family? Does that mean that what I gave her by raising her alone wasn't real? I'm not criticizing Vanessa, I said quietly. I'm just worried about you. You've changed so much since you got married. Yes, I've changed. I've grown. I don't cling to the past and old grudges like you do. I'm looking forward to the future, building a career, supporting my husband. And I'd appreciate it if you'd support me too, just once, by letting me have a family reunion at your house. We both fell silent. A tension hung in the air, thick and heavy, like a thunderstorm. I looked at my daughter and saw her as a stranger, a woman who spoke in words and phrases borrowed from others, who organized her life according to other people's expectations. I will think about your request, I said at last. I'll give you an answer in a few days. Vanessa pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy that she didn't have an immediate agreement. Okay, but don't take too long. Orlando had already started telling everyone about the possibility of holding the meeting here, and it would be awkward if they had to change plans. It was typical of Orlando to create a situation where refusing would look like my fault. I felt my irritation building, but decided not to show it. I'll get back to you in the next few days, I promised. Vanessa suddenly looked at her watch and groaned. Oh my God, I'm late for a client meeting. She jumped up from her seat, spilling the rest of her tea. I've got to run. I walked her to the door and she gave me a quick goodbye hug, already mentally somewhere else. See you, Mom. Think about my request, okay? It's so important to me and Orlando. And she took off, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a feeling of incompleteness. I stood on the doorstep, watching her car go around the corner, and tried to sort out my feelings. On the one hand, I was disappointed that our meeting had once again been reduced to a request, an attempt to use me. On the other hand, I was worried about Vanessa. It was obvious that she was heavily influenced by the Kellaway family, who seemed to be methodically separating her from her past, from her roots, from me. Back in the house, I began putting away the dishes. A bright lipstick mark remained on Vanessa's cup, the only evidence that she was really here. Sometimes I thought our meetings were becoming more and more ephemeral, as if we were slowly turning into ghosts from each other's past. I poured myself a glass of wine, even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. I could afford it today. Settling down on the terrace, I looked out over my garden and pondered Vanessa's request. Would I let the Calloway family fill my house? Would I be able to withstand this invasion? And what would happen if I said no? My thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. The number was unfamiliar, and I hesitated for a while before answering. Hello, Eleanor? It was a man's voice, overconfident and loud. "This is Orlando, your son-in-law. How are you?" I tensed. Orlando never called me just to chat. Every conversation we had a hidden agenda. "Hello, Orlando. I'm fine, thank you." "Great, great. Listen, Vanessa just told me about your conversation. I realize you are still thinking about our request for a family gathering, but I wanted to personally assure you that we would really appreciate your help. It means so much to my family." His tone was honeyed, but I could sense the underlying metal. It wasn't a request, it was pressure. "I appreciate your call, Orlando, but as I told Vanessa, I need time to think things over." Of course, of course. We all realize this is a big decision. I just want you to know that my family is already very excited at the prospect of meeting in your beautiful home, especially my parents. They so rarely get out of the city, and the opportunity to spend time in nature is just a gift to them. I felt like I was being backed into a corner. If I said no now, I would look like a heartless mother-in-law who deprived the elderly of a rare joy. "I'll let Vanessa know my decision in the next few days," I said firmly. "Wonderful. I have no doubt you'll make the right decision." "We all appreciate your kindness, Eleanor." After the conversation, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Something about Orlando's tone bothered me. He sounded too confident, like a man who knows he'll get what he wants. And then there was that phrase, "the right decision," as if I only had one option that he thought was acceptable. I got up and started walking around the terrace, thinking about the situation. Something told me there was more behind this request than just a desire to get the family together. Orlando had never shown any interest in my house before. Why now? And why was he being so persistent? It was getting evening, and the garden was colored in the golden pink tones of sunset. I looked at my roses, at the lily pond, at every corner of this space I had so lovingly created, and thought about how it would look when the Kellaway horde arrived. Noisy conversations, loud laughter, children running around on the lawn, men with bottles of beer, women discussing the latest gossip. My sanctuary, my island of tranquility, would turn into a noisy beach during the tourist season. And yet, this was my daughter. Despite our differences, despite the chasm that grew between us with each passing year, I loved her and wanted to support her. But was this the right way to do it? To allow her and her husband to manipulate me, to use me and my home? I didn't notice it was getting dark. The garden had fallen into twilight, and only the light from the windows of the house created warm islands in the encroaching darkness. I had a decision to make, and I felt it could change my relationship with my daughter forever. When I returned to the house, I found that Vanessa had forgotten her scarf, a thin silk shawl with an intricate pattern. I held it up to my face and smelled her perfume. For a moment, I thought I was holding a piece of the Vanessa I used to know, an independent, intelligent girl with big dreams and a strong character. Where had that Vanessa gone? And is it still possible to bring her back? I folded the scarf neatly and put it on the dresser by the entrance. Tomorrow I would call my daughter and let her know my decision. But today I needed to gather my thoughts and prepare for what I felt was inevitably coming, a battle for my home, my peace, my independence. Something told me that the next call from Orlando or Vanessa would not be a request, but an ultimatum. And that was something I had to be prepared for. I always felt like Thursday was the quietest day of the week. Nothing much usually happens. It lurked shyly between Business Wednesday and the anticipation of the weekend on Friday. It was on this inconspicuous day of the week that the phone call came that turned my measured life upside down. I had just finished rereading my favorite detective novel for the third time when the phone rang. Orlando's number popped up on the screen. Usually he only called me for money or when he wanted a favor from me. After my recent conversation with Vanessa about the possibility of having a family gathering at my house, I expected him to pressure me into agreeing. With a deep sigh, I replied, "Hello, Orlando." "Eleanor." His voice sounded unusually cheerful and confident. "I hope you are well. It's gorgeous weather today, isn't it?" I was always annoyed by his habit of starting conversations with meaningless questions about the weather or my well-being that he didn't give a damn about. "Yes, the weather's nice," I replied dryly. "To what do I owe the call?" "Oh, that's wonderful news." His voice was filled with unconcealed triumph. "I've solved all the problems with organizing our family reunion. We're on our way to your place." I froze, not believing my ears. "What do you mean, we're on our way?" I asked cautiously. "We haven't made any arrangements yet." "Eleanor, Eleanor," he interrupted me in that condescending tone one uses with a cranky child. "Vanessa told me you were only considering it out of politeness. She assured us you'd be thrilled to welcome the Calloway family into your beautiful home." My fingers gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Had Vanessa lied to him, or had he made up the story himself? Either way, I was being confronted with a fact without the slightest respect for my opinion. "I haven't given my consent yet," I said firmly. "And I need time to prepare if I decide to accept you all." "Plenty of time," he said nonchalantly. "We won't be there until this evening. I'm on my way with my relatives, and there will be 15 of us, so get the beds, towels, and food ready." I was breathless at this insolence. 15 people, no warning. There are only 3 bedrooms in my house, including my own. How does he envision accommodating that many people? "Orlando," I began, trying to remain calm. "It's impossible. I don't have that many sleeping bags, and I haven't prepared." "We brought sleeping bags," he interrupted me again. "Don't worry about the little things. Just make a good dinner. My parents are particularly fond of roast beef, and don't forget enough towels for everyone." "Oh, yes, and my sister Fiona is bringing her twins. They're 4 years old, so they might be a bit noisy. But I'm sure you won't mind, considering you don't have grandchildren." That last phrase, spoken with fake sympathy, was the final blow. Orlando knew perfectly well how much I felt badly about not having grandchildren, and now he was using it against me. I felt something inside me click like a switch. "Of course, Orlando," I said in an unusually gentle voice. "I'll be glad to see all of you. Be sure to come." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Apparently, my quick agreement had confused him. "That's fine," he said at last, not so confidently. "I'll see you tonight then. We'll be there around 6. When the conversation was over, I sat staring at the space in front of me for a few more minutes. Outrage, resentment, anger, all those feelings were overlaid by the strange calm that came with the decision I'd made. I'm not gonna let Orlando and his relatives push me around. If they want to barge in uninvited, let them be prepared for the consequences. The first thing I did was call my neighbor Kathleen. "Kathleen, you won't believe what just happened," I began, and told her about Orlando's call. How insolent. She was outraged. "What are you going to do? Call Vanessa? Lock the doors?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'll take them in, but on my terms." I shared my plan with her. Kathleen first gasped, then giggled, and then burst into such an infectious laugh that I couldn't help but join her. "Oh, Eleanor, you're a genius," she exclaimed when we finally calmed down. "What can I do to help?" "I'll need something from your garden," I replied. "And perhaps Gideon's help. He still has that stuffed owl in his office at the university, doesn't he?" "Of course. He still keeps it in the pantry. The poor bird's a bit battered, but it looks very impressive in the semi-darkness." "That's great. And I was wondering about your CD collection. You have some ethnic music CDs that you brought back from Indonesia, right?" Kathleen confirmed that she still had the CDs and promised to bring them along with the stuffed owl. We agreed that she would come by in an hour, and in the meantime, I began my preparations. The first thing I did was go through my bedding. The oldest, washed out sheets I kept for gardening would now be perfect for guests. I pulled out pillowcases with faded colors, duvet covers with lint, and shabby towels. Then I looked around the guest bedrooms. One of them had recently had a roof leak during a heavy rainstorm, leaving unsightly yellow stains on the ceiling. This room I decided to give to Orlando's parents. Next, I tackled the bathroom. Mixing water with a little flour, I made the faucets and the drain in the bathroom look like old lime scale. Then I turned up the hot water valve so that it was running at a very low pressure. Then she put the hardest soap she could find in the bathroom and towels that had long since lost their softness. At that time, Kathleen arrived with Gideon. They brought a stuffed owl, CDs of ethnic music, some strange-smelling plants from their garden, and, to my surprise, a large bag of some electronic devices. Gideon thought these might come in handy, Kathleen explained, pointing to the bag. These are the old motion sensors he used for his experiments to scare rats away from the compost pit. They activate an audible alarm when someone walks by. That's a great idea. I hugged them both. I don't know what I'd do without you. We're neighbors, Eleanor, Gideon said seriously. We need to stick together against outside invaders. All three of us laughed, and I felt a rush of gratitude toward these people who had become closer to me than many relatives in 6 years. With Gideon's help, I installed motion sensors in strategic places, near the entrance to the guest bedrooms, in the hallway leading to the bathroom, and on the terrace. Each sensor was connected to a small speaker that, when activated, made either a creaking floorboard, a strange whisper, or a sound like claws scratching on wood. I placed the stuffed owl on the top shelf of the closet in the guest bedroom, reserved for Orlando's brother and his wife. The bird looked ominous, especially in the semi-darkness, and seemed to watch the room with empty eye sockets. Meanwhile, Kathleen busied herself with the garden. She had brought in a few plants that looked completely harmless, but caused a slight burning sensation on the skin when touched. Nothing dangerous, but unpleasant enough to be memorable. These plants she strategically placed along the paths where guests were likely to stroll. Do you think it's not too much? I asked her as I watched her work. For people who invade someone else's home uninvited? Kathleen shook her head. Not at all. Besides, like I said, the plants are harmless. Just a reminder to your uninvited guests that not everything in nature is designed for their pleasure. When the basic preparations in the house and garden were finished, we got busy in the kitchen. Instead of the beef roast that Orlando's parents love so much, I decided to make a vegetarian stew of vegetables that looked delicious but had a strange combination of flavors. There were sweet potatoes, bitter spinach, sour tomatoes, and too much spice to make your mouth feel like you were eating dessert and a spicy dish at the same time. It's genius, Kathleen said, tasting my creation. Edible, but wrong. That's the effect I was going for. I smiled. They won't be able to say I didn't feed them, but they won't enjoy it. For added effect, I made toast with a spread that looked like pâté, but was actually a mixture of avocado, soy sauce, and a little cocoa that made for an unexpected and not so pleasant taste experience. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all preparations were finished. Gideon installed the last motion sensor in the garden, which, when activated, turned on a recording from a CD of ethnic music, a monotonous chant in an unfamiliar language that sounded almost like an incantation. All done, he said, wiping his hands. All that's left is to set up the cameras to capture their reactions. No cameras, I said firmly. I don't want proof of what happened. Everything has to stay on the level of their words against mine. And who would believe that a quiet, elderly woman would do such a thing? Kathleen and Gideon looked at each other respectfully. You've really thought this through, Kathleen said. What will you do when they arrive? I'll play the role of the hostess, I answered, and watch the events unfold. At 5:30 sharp, Kathleen and Gideon left, promising to be in touch if I needed help. I showered, put on my best dress, a navy blue dress with a white collar that made me look like a strict school teacher, and sat in a chair on the terrace with a book, waiting for the guests to arrive. At 6 o'clock and 5 minutes, I heard the noise of cars approaching. From the sound of it, there were at least three. Through the window, I saw people, lots of people, begin to unload from the cars. Adults, children, the elderly, they all looked a lot like Orlando, just as confident, loud, and with a characteristic dismissive glance around, as if assessing whether this place was worth their presence. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and slowly made my way toward the front door. It was time for the show to begin. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was Orlando with a wide grin on his face. Standing next to him was Vanessa, looking confused and unsure. Perhaps she was beginning to realize that her husband had gone too far. "Eleanor!" Orlando exclaimed, opening his arms. "How wonderful to see you!" I nodded coldly and stepped aside, letting them into the house. "Welcome," I said with a faint smile. "Come in, all of you. Don't be shy." And they came in, the whole procession of Kellaways, one by one, filling my quiet house with loud voices, laughter, and the sound of feet shuffling on the floor. I stood back, watching them set up in my living room, taking my chairs, touching my things, all the while waiting for the surprises my neighbors and I had prepared to trigger. The first motion detector went off when one of Orlando's brothers, Torben, headed down the hallway leading to the bathroom. Suddenly, there was the quiet but distinct sound of footsteps, as if someone was walking right behind him. Torben turned around sharply but saw no one. His face contorted with confusion for a moment, but then he shrugged and continued on his way. I suppressed a smile and turned to Hilda, Orlando's mother, a thin, wiry woman with a sharp look and tight lips. "Would you like a cup of tea?" I offered. I was just about to put the kettle on. "If you have coffee, I'd prefer it," she said in a tone that brooked no objection. "And I think everyone else needs something to drink after a long drive, too." "Sure." I nodded and headed for the kitchen. On my way out, I noticed the two children, Fiona's twins, already reaching for the vase on the low table. Mentally, I thanked myself for putting away all the really valuable items beforehand and putting inexpensive replicas in their place. In the kitchen, I started making coffee, adding a pinch of salt. Not enough to make it overtly salty, but enough to leave a strange aftertaste. For the kids, I made juice, diluted with water to almost tastelessness. When I returned to the living room with the tray, the atmosphere was already beginning to change. Torben was excitedly telling the others about the strange sounds in the hallway. Fiona was trying to soothe a crying child, who had apparently managed to touch one of the special plants Kathleen had brought. And Richard, Orlando's father, stood by the window with a disgruntled expression on his face, studying my garden. "There's something wrong with your lawn," he said when I offered him a cup of coffee. "There are some strange shadows there, and the smell is unusual." "Does it?" I asked innocently. "I don't notice anything. Perhaps it's just the effect of the evening light." Richard eyed me warily, but took the cup and took a sip. His face twisted slightly, and he struggled to hold back a grimace. "Interesting. Flavor," he mumbled. "A family recipe?" I replied with a smile. At that moment, a piercing scream came from one of the guest bedrooms. Everyone froze, and then Petra, Orlando's sister, popped out into the living room with a pale face. "There's something there," she exclaimed, pointing in the direction of the room. "In the closet. I saw the eyes." Orlando rushed into the room, and I calmly sipped my tea. I made a normal drink for myself. He came back a minute later, looking slightly embarrassed. It's just an old stuffed owl, Petra, he said. It's no big deal. But it moved, Petra insisted. I saw it turn its head. You imagined it. Orlando cut him off and turned to me. Eleanor, could you take that bird away? It scares my sister. Oh, it's a gift from my late husband. I lied innocently. It has great sentimental value to me, but I can cover it with a cloth if you'd like. Orlando looked displeased, but didn't argue. Instead, he began to assign who would sleep in which room, completely ignoring the fact that this was my house and such decisions should be made by me. Vanessa and I will take the master bedroom, he said. Actually, I interrupted him, this is my bedroom, and I'd rather you take the guest rooms. There was an awkward silence for a moment. Vanessa looked terribly embarrassed, and Orlando's face reddened with anger. Of course, he said with a strained smile. If you say so. In that case, Vanessa and I will take the large guest bedroom, my parents will take the smaller one, and the rest of us will set up here in the living room with our sleeping bags. I nodded, mentally grinning. The large guest bedroom was the one where I'd installed motion sensors that activated the sounds of footsteps and whispers, and the small one had those very yellow stains on the ceiling from a leak. There were many surprises in store for the Kellaway family that night. Soon, other effects of my preparations began to show. Some of the guests discovered that the hot water was barely running in the bathroom. Fiona's kids started complaining about the strange taste of the juice, and when I served my special vegetarian stew for dinner, instead of the expected beef roast, Hilda couldn't hide her disappointment. We thought it would be meat, she said reproachfully. Orlando said you knew our preferences. Oh, I'm so guilty, I replied with fake regret. I've been on a vegetarian diet lately. It's good for my health at my age, you know. Hilda looked like she had swallowed a lemon, but was forced to accept my apology. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. Torben kept hearing strange noises in the hallway. Petra refused to go back into the room with the stuffed owl. The children were cranky about unusual food and strange sensations from the plants in the garden. And when someone decided to take a walk around the plot at dusk, a sensor suddenly activated, turning on a recording with monotonous singing, which caused a real panic among the guests. What is this creepy place? Whispered one of the Orlando brothers' wives to her husband, unaware that I was standing close enough to hear. Something strange is going on here. I slowly turned my head in their direction and smiled my most innocent smile. The woman flinched and looked away. Toward nightfall, as everyone began to get ready for bed, I noticed many of the guests looking worried and tense. Some were even whispering about maybe finding a hotel in town. But Orlando, with his exorbitant pride, insisted that everything was fine and there was no reason to worry. I said goodnight to everyone and retired to my bedroom, the only place in the house left untouched by my preparations. Closing the door, I allowed myself a wide smile. The plan was working even better than I'd expected, and it was only the first night. Lying in bed, I listened to the sounds of the house, rustles, whispers, creaking floorboards, and not just the ones programmed by the sensors. I could hear the Kellaways wandering around the house, trying to find the comfort they weren't meant to find on this night. I could hear Orlando and Vanessa's muffled argument behind the wall. It sounded like my daughter was beginning to realize the mistake they'd made by invading my home uninvited. With a sense of satisfaction, I closed my eyes and drifted into a restful sleep. The morning promised to bring new and interesting events, and I was ready to continue my little play. The Kellaway family wanted to stay with me? Well, they would have an unforgettable experience that would make them think twice before violating someone else's boundaries again. After the call from Orlando, I stared at the phone in my hand as if it had turned into a poisonous snake. This man's insolence knew no bounds. However, during the years of acquaintance with him, I should have gotten used to such antics. Orlando always thought that the world was his personal playground, and the people around him were just extras in his great play. The smile that appeared on my face after the conversation was not the kind of smile that expresses joy. It was the smile of a man who had just made an important decision. I won't let the Kellaway family turn my house into another stage for their never ending family drama. If they want to come uninvited, let them be prepared for the consequences. The first thing I did was make a list of what I would need to properly welcome my guests. Years as a court stenographer have taught me methodicalness and attention to detail. Every word, every nuance of intonation, every pause in the speech of attorneys and witnesses, it all mattered and could affect the outcome of a case. Now these skills would come in handy in a completely different situation. I remembered one of the most high-profile cases in my practice, the divorce of millionaire Hugh Patterson and his third wife, Leonora. Hugh was convinced he could intimidate Leonora into giving up her fair share of the estate. He brought a whole team of lawyers, relatives, and friends into the courtroom to apply moral pressure. But Leonora was smarter than that. She did not respond to aggression with aggression, nor did she throw tantrums. Instead, she methodically and calmly presented evidence of his machinations, infidelity, and psychological abuse. And when the dust settled, she was the one who came out victorious. This story popped into my mind for a reason. Now, Orlando, like Hugh Patterson years ago, tried to take me on with brashness, numbers, loud statements. But I had learned the lesson of Leonora. Victory is not achieved by shouting, but by a carefully thought out strategy. I took out a notebook and began to draw up a plan of action. 15 people in my house was a real invasion, and I needed to prepare accordingly. First on the list of things I needed were old, stale bedding sets, stiff towels, broken or uncomfortable furniture, food that looked appetizing but tasted strange. I would also need help from neighbors and perhaps some tech gadgets. I dialed the number of Kathleen Hobbs, my closest neighbor and friend. Over the 6 years of living in the suburbs, she and I had become really close, despite the difference in age and life experiences. Kathleen, a former botanist, had not only a vast knowledge of plants, but also an amazing sense of humor. Kathleen, I have an emergency, I said when she answered. Would you mind coming in? And, if possible, bring Gideon. Gideon Hobbs, Kathleen's husband and former history professor, was one of the most erudite people I'd ever met. He was also known for the pranks and jokes he would pull on students during particularly boring lectures. 15 minutes later, the Hobbses were sitting in my living room, listening intently to the story of Orlando's unceremonious phone call and my decision to teach his family a lesson. That man is unbearable, Kathleen exclaimed when I finished. How dare he treat you like that? Gideon, usually calm and reasonable, looked equally indignant. You know, Eleanor, he said, adjusting his glasses. In ancient Sparta, he would have been flogged in the town square for such disrespect to his elders. I smiled, imagining that picture. Unfortunately, we are not in Sparta, and physical punishment is not in fashion now. But I've come up with something better, and I need your help. I showed them my list. Kathleen and Gideon studied it, occasionally glancing at each other and smirking. That's brilliant, Kathleen said at last. Totally within the law, but effective. What can we do to help? You have a collection of interesting plants, don't you? I asked. The ones that aren't dangerous but are uncomfortable to touch or have a strange odor? Kathleen brightened. Oh, I have a few that would be perfect. For example, Jerusalem nettle. It causes a temporary tingling sensation on contact, but leaves no residue. Or the common dope. Its odor can give you a slight headache if you're around it for long enough. And I, Gideon intervened, have some old motion sensors that I used for an experiment with rats. They can be programmed to play different sounds when activated. I nodded, feeling the plan take shape. One more thing, I added. You still have that stuffed owl that used to stand in Gideon's office, don't you? Gideon laughed. Good old Minerva. Of course we still have it. It's a bit battered, but it looks quite impressive in the semi-darkness. We continued to discuss the details of the plan. Kathleen promised to bring plants and help prepare special food for the guests. Gideon took care of the technical part, installing motion sensors and programming sound effects. I had to prepare the house, find the most uncomfortable linens, make the bathroom less attractive, and think about the distribution of guest rooms. After the Hobbses left, I set about implementing my part of the plan. In the closet, I found old bedding sets that I'd been meaning to throw away or convert to cleaning rags for a long time. Stiff, faded, linty, they were perfect for my uninvited guests. Next, I tackled the bathroom. One of the most unpleasant hotel experiences is a poorly functioning shower and stiff towels. I turned the hot water valve up a bit, reducing the pressure to a minimum. Then I took out the stiffest towels I could find and put them in a prominent place. To top it off, I added an old soap that was barely lathering at all. After looking at the guest rooms, I decided that Orlando's parents would have the one with the recent roof leak. The yellow stains on the ceiling didn't make for a very pleasant atmosphere. For Orlando's brother, Torben, and his wife, I chose a room with east-facing windows, as the sunlight would wake them up mercilessly in the early morning. After lunch, Kathleen and Gideon returned, laden with bags of plants, electronics, and, to my surprise, CDs of ethnic music. These are recordings of ritual chants from Indonesia, Kathleen explained, noticing my questioning look. They're harmless, but they sound, shall we say, unusual to the Western ear, especially when played unexpectedly in a dark garden. Gideon, meanwhile, took a stuffed owl out of a large box. Minerva, as he called her, did look impressive. The large glass eyes seemed to follow every movement in the room. Where should I put her? Gideon asked. I wondered. In the closet in the bedroom reserved for Brother Orlando, on the top shelf so it would sort of look down when the door opened. Gideon nodded, appreciating the idea, and went to put the owl in place. Kathleen, meanwhile, began to arrange the plants she had brought. These should be placed along the paths in the garden, she said, pointing to small shrubs with soft-looking leaves. They sting slightly when touched, not dangerous, but not unpleasant. I helped her plant the plants in strategic places where guests were likely to stroll or gather in groups. When Gideon returned, we set about installing the motion sensors. He showed me how they work. These devices react to motion and activate a sound file. I programmed several variations: creaking floorboards, whispers, sounds like claws scratching on wood. It's all very realistic. We installed sensors in the hallway leading to the bathroom, in the guest bedrooms, and on the terrace. Each one was set to a specific sound and sensitivity level. This one is special, Gideon said, showing the last sensor. It activates the Indonesian music. I think it would be best to place it at the back of the garden, where some of the guests will probably decide to take an evening stroll. While the men were busy setting up the technical devices, Kathleen and I moved into the kitchen. We had to come up with a menu that looked appetizing but left a strange aftertaste. Orlando said his parents like beef roast, I said. But I think a vegetarian stew would be a more interesting option. Kathleen smiled and pulled some containers out of her bag. I brought some spices that will help us with this. They're not harmful, they just create unusual flavor combinations. For example, this curry and cinnamon blend. It looks like a regular spice, but it tastes like someone mixed up a dessert with the main course. We set about making dinner. The vegetarian stew was made with sweet potatoes, bitter spinach, sour tomatoes, and a generous portion of Kathleen's special seasonings. The result looked quite appetizing, but the flavor was peculiar to say the least. edible but oddly somehow wrong. For the appetizer, we prepared a spread that looked like pate, but consisted of avocado, soy sauce, and cocoa. It looks like regular pate, but the flavor? I took a small bite and grimaced. It's perfect, Kathleen said, noticing my reaction. They wouldn't be able to tell what was wrong, but they wouldn't enjoy it. I decided to add a pinch of salt to the tea and coffee, not enough to make them overtly salty, but enough to create an unpleasant aftertaste. While we were in the kitchen, Gideon finished installing all the technical devices and came back to us. Everything is ready, he reported, rubbing his hands together. Sensors have been installed at key points and set to different sounds. I've also added a slight delay to make the effect even creepier. Imagine someone walking down the hallway, and just as they're about to reach the door, there's a creak of floorboards or a whisper from behind. I thanked Gideon for his help. His enthusiasm for our plan was infectious. I've always believed that impoliteness should have consequences, he said, taking off his glasses and wiping them clean. There have been many students in my teaching practice who thought they could behave as they pleased without fear of a reaction. Little lessons in politeness work wonders. It reminded me of an incident from my career as a stenographer. Once a young attorney, a cocky graduate of a prestigious law school, constantly interrupted witnesses and even the judge. He ignored all comments, believing that his flamboyant style would impress the jury. Judge Morrison, an older woman with a reputation for fairness but strictness, put up with these antics for a long time, but at some point her patience ran out. She didn't yell or threaten sanctions, I told Kathleen and Gideon. She just looked at the lawyer over her glasses and said, I suggest you look up Martinez v. State of Texas, 1987. It's very educational for young lawyers. And she continued the session. And what was in that case? Gideon was interested. Nothing much, I smiled. But the lawyer didn't know that. He spent all night studying the Martinez case, trying to figure out what lesson the judge wanted to teach him. The next day, he came to court pale, with circles under his eyes, and he behaved impeccably. Only later did I learn that the Martinez case was a routine divorce proceeding without any legal innovation. The judge simply knew that the cocky youngster would not admit to being unfamiliar with the case and made him learn the lesson on his own. Kathleen and Gideon laughed, appreciating the grace of the judge's decision. That's the approach we're taking now, Gideon said. No direct confrontations, no scandals. We simply create the conditions in which they will come to their own conclusions. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all preparations were completed. Gideon checked all the motion sensors. Kathleen made sure the plants were safely planted along the paths, and I prepared the guest bedrooms and set the table for dinner. I think we've done all we can, Kathleen said, looking at the results of our work. Now, we just have to wait and see how they react. Gideon offered to install hidden cameras to capture the facial expressions of the guests, but I refused. No, no evidence, I said firmly. Everything would have to remain on the level of their words against mine. And who would believe a quiet, elderly woman could do such a thing? Kathleen gave me one more hug before she left. You're the bravest woman I know, Eleanor. Most would just swallow that insolence and let them stomp through their lives. Her words touched me. When I was young, I rarely fought back, preferring to avoid conflict. Even when Raymond, my ex-husband, had left Vanessa and me, I hadn't made a scene or demanded an explanation. I just accepted it as a fact and focused on raising my daughter. But over the years, I've realized that silence isn't always gold. Sometimes it just lets other people think they can do whatever they want to you. Working as a stenographer taught me to observe, analyze, and draw conclusions. I saw how people manipulated each other, how the loudest and most assertive often got what they didn't deserve, simply because others backed down in the face of their pressure. One of the most important cases of my career involved an elderly woman, Mrs. Elizabeth Brooks, whom a nephew was trying to foreclose on her home, claiming she was incapacitated. Elizabeth was quiet, reserved, but in her eyes I could see steely determination. When her nephew's attorney questioned her, trying to confuse and provoke her into emotional reactions, she remained unfazed. And then, when it was her turn to speak, she broke down all of his arguments in a calm, measured voice, demonstrating clarity of mind and firmness of character. After the meeting, I went up to her and expressed my admiration for her fortitude. "My dear," she said to me then, "when you are over 70, you realize that life is too short to waste it on fear of other people's opinions. Do what you think is right, and don't let anyone take away what is yours, whether it's your possessions or your peace." These words have stuck with me, and now, as I prepare to host the Kellaway family, I feel I am acting in the spirit of Elizabeth Brooks. I was defending not only my home, but also my right to respect, to personal boundaries, to the quiet life I had earned after decades of labor. At exactly 5 hours and 30 minutes, Kathleen and Gideon left, promising to be in touch if I needed support. I showered, put on my best dress, navy blue with a white collar, and sat in a chair on the terrace with a book, awaiting the arrival of my guests. At 6 o'clock and 5 minutes, I heard the noise of cars approaching. From the sound of the engines, there were at least 3 of them. The whole caravan of Kellaways had arrived at my doorstep. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and mentally prepared myself for the evening ahead. As I watched the people approaching the house through the window, I remembered another incident from my professional life. It was a fraud case where a group of young con artists tried to defraud an elderly investor by presenting him with forged documents about a promising business. They were self-assured, assertive, and at first their tactics seemed to work. But the investor, Mr. Fuller, remained unfazed. He listened intently, asked questions, and seemed almost convinced. And then, when the con artists were already celebrating victory, he politely declined their offer, explaining that he had noticed the discrepancies in their documents at the very beginning of the presentation, but wanted to see how far they would go. Now I felt a bit like Mr. Fuller. The Calloway family had barged into my life, believing that their numbers and pressure would break down any resistance, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I'd learned a lot in my 74 years of life, and one of the most valuable lessons was how to fight back without sinking to the level of the aggressor. I got up from my chair, adjusted the collar of my dress, and headed for the front door to greet my guests. There was an evening ahead that they would remember for a long time, and I, Eleanor Turvey, would finally show them that still waters can be the deepest, and that old age is not weakness, but wisdom tempered by experience. I stood at the entrance watching cars one by one fill my driveway. The first to stop was Orlando's SUV, a big, shiny SUV that had been bought beyond my means. A minivan with kids and adults parked behind it, followed by a sedan with Orlando's parents. My son-in-law got out first, looking like the owner of the estate. He was dressed like a successful businessman on vacation, light beige slacks and a navy blue shirt. Vanessa followed, visibly nervous. "Eleanor!" Orlando exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. "Here we are. What a lovely house you have." I just nodded, not moving from my seat. The rest of the Kellaways poured out of the minivan. I counted 3 children, including twins, 2 women, Orlando's sisters, Petra and Fiona, and their husbands. Richard and Hilda got out of the sedan, a tall man with a military bearing and a short, bossy woman with gray hair. "Welcome," I said as they approached. "I hope the journey hasn't been tiring." "Not at all," Orlando said. The children were a little tired, though. One of the twins, a boy, fell on the lawn at that moment and started screaming for ice cream. Fiona rushed over to him. Kyle, stop it. We're guests. Behave yourself. The first to approach me were Orlando's parents. Frau Eleanor, said Richard with a German accent, thank you for your hospitality. Although we were surprised by your invitation, I didn't invite you, I replied calmly. Orlando told me you were coming, and I had to prepare myself. But Orlando said, Mom, Dad, come inside. Orlando intervened, pushing them in. Eleanor's joking, isn't she? He winked at me. I stepped back, letting them pass. Most were looking at my house appraisingly, and only Vanessa looked embarrassed. Mom, she said quietly, I didn't know he'd call you like that. He said you talked it over. We'll talk later, I replied. In the living room, the family quickly settled in. The Orlando brothers took the chairs, their wives took the couch, and the kids ran around touching everything. What a charming house, Hilda said. It's a little old-fashioned, though. You should redecorate, Eleanor. I like my interior like this, I interrupted her. Would you like tea or coffee? Coffee would be lovely, Hilda nodded, and cookies for the children. They're very hungry. Vanessa joined me in the kitchen. Mom, I'm sorry, she began. It didn't come out right. I just mentioned the possibility of meeting here, and Orlando took matters into his own hands. And didn't ask my opinion, I finished. He has no respect for me or my boundaries, and apparently neither do yours. My daughter lowered her eyes. He's just very energetic. He wanted what was best for him. For who? For himself? Certainly not for me. The twin girl burst into the kitchen and started demanding cookies. Aunt Nessa, I want a cookie. Now. Lily, you can't do that, Vanessa said softly. Say please. I don't want cookies. I want cookies. She stomped her foot. I silently pulled out a pack of old cookies and handed them to the girl. Here, just don't sprinkle it on the carpet. Lily ran off without thanking me. Vanessa sighed. Sorry about her. Fiona and Max aren't strict in their parenting. Noted, I replied dryly. When we returned with the tray, the atmosphere had already begun to change. Torben came back from the hallway worried. You have strange noises here, he told me. It's like someone is walking behind you, but when you turn around, there's no one there. Really? I was surprised. I've never noticed anything like that before. Maybe it's an old house, Richard suggested. They often creak like old people with arthritis. Everyone laughed except Torben. I poured the coffee, adding a pinch of salt to each cup except mine. Orlando was the first to take a sip, and he grumbled. Interesting flavor, he said. It's a family recipe, I smiled. My grandmother always added spices for flavor. The others tasted it too and crinkled their noses, but no one recognized it as unpleasant. Where are we going to sleep? Torben asked, setting the cup aside. I've already planned everything, Orlando intervened. Vanessa and I will take the big bedroom. My parents will take the small one. Torben and Janina will sleep in the study, and the rest of us will sleep on sleeping bags here. I coughed. Actually, I've already prepared the rooms. Orlando and Vanessa in the bedroom with windows to the east. Richard and Hilda, at the end of the corridor, the rest, in the living room. But I said, Orlando started, but I interrupted him with a look. This is my house, and I decide who sleeps where. There was a pause. Orlando wanted to object, but Vanessa put her hand on his shoulder. Of course, Mom. Whatever you say. Fiona's children found the door to the garden and ran outside. Be careful, I shouted. Some plants can cause irritation. Fiona rushed after them. What kind of plants? Are they poisonous? Not poisonous. They can just cause a burning sensation. It's nothing serious. But she wasn't listening. After the rest, the guests began to take things to their rooms. I watched them discover the features of the rooms. What are those stains on the ceiling? Hilda was outraged. A small leak during the rain? I replied. The roof's been fixed. And this? The best bedding? For guests, yes. I hope you'll be comfortable. In Orlando and Vanessa's room, the bed was too short for him and the curtain was too thin. Mom, don't you have a thicker curtain? Vanessa asked. Orlando is sensitive to light in the morning. Unfortunately, no. I like to wake up at the crack of dawn. By evening, my surprises had begun to take effect. Torben heard whispering in the hallway. His brother's wife complained of burning from the plants. The children refused cookies, but the biggest surprise was my vegetarian stew instead of meat. What is this? Richard asked, looking at the plate. Vegetarian stew with special spices. It's very healthy. The hungry guests began to eat. Faces wrinkled, some coughed, trying to hide their disgust. Very unusual, Hilda said, but I'll limit myself to bread. Diet. I thought you liked roast, I remarked. Yes, we prefer meat, Richard confirmed. Our family has always appreciated steak. I wish I had been told in advance. I would have cooked something more suitable. After dinner, Orlando suggested going out into the garden and having a picnic. That's a great idea. Torben seconded that. Does anyone have flashlights? Soon, a frightened scream came from the garden. A motion detector was triggered, and an Indonesian chant was heard. The screams of children and adults were heard. What's that sound? Screamed one of the women. There's something in the bushes, Torben echoed. Children, over here, get in the house, Fiona called out. I was sitting quietly in the chair when they burst back in, interrupting each other. There's strange music, Torben exclaimed. It's like someone is singing in a strange language, and footsteps in the dark, and a strange glow between the trees, added Janina, like the eyes of something big. Strange, I said thoughtfully. I've never noticed anything like that before. Although, what? Orlando asked. Rumor has it that there was an Indian cemetery here, but it's just legends, faces stretched out. Even Richard looked worried. Why didn't you warn us? Hilda was indignant. I thought it was known. Besides, they're just legends. I didn't notice anything strange until you arrived. After that, no one wanted to come out. The sensors in the corridor kept going off, triggering new fears. I can't sleep here, Janina declared. Don't talk nonsense, Torben reassured. It's just an old house. And how do you explain the music in the garden and the sounds in the hallway? And why did it all start when we arrived? Everyone looked at me. I kept my cool. Fiona was the first to say, we should look for a hotel. It'll be quieter here. Don't be silly, Orlando said. We plan to meet here, so we will. It's not just the sounds, his brother intervened. Everything here is strange. Coffee with salt, hard beds, horrible stew. It's like someone's making it uncomfortable on purpose. The eyes turned back to me. I acted surprised. I don't know what you mean. I've prepared the best I have. Dear guests, Hilda snorted. You didn't want us to come, Orlando said. You resisted to the last. I didn't plan to have so many guests, I replied calmly. But when Orlando said you were on your way, what else could I do? What do you mean you were on your way? Hilda asked, turning to her son. Orlando looked cornered. I wanted everything to go smoothly. Eleanor seemed hesitant. So you lied? Richard straightened up. You put us in this position? At that moment, there was a whisper from behind the wall again. What's that? One of the women shuddered. Did you hear it? I can't take it anymore, Fiona said. The children and I are leaving. Right now. Max, pack your things. You can't leave, Orlando was outraged. It's our family tradition. We have to break it this time, Fiona said firmly. I'm not staying in this house. And I'm leaving. Janina joined in. Torben, get ready. Torben hesitated, but common sense won out. Okay, I'm sorry, brother, but Janina is right. Something strange is going on here. Even Orlando's parents have started packing. We'll look for a hotel, too, Richard said. Not that I believe in the sound nonsense, but sleeping under leak stains is not what I expected. Orlando was thrashing around trying to stop the running. This is ridiculous. You're acting like children. One sound and you're running. And the traditions? To hell with tradition, Torben cut him off. I won't risk my sanity for your stubbornness. Stay here by yourself. Orlando turned to Vanessa. Tell them. Tell them it's all right. Orlando, I'm not sure I want to stay here. These sounds are scary. That was the final blow. Orlando looked at his wife like she was a traitor. Then he looked at me. You did it. You set this whole thing up. The sounds, the bad food, the hard beds. You tried to keep us alive. I replied nonchalantly, I don't know what you mean. I'm just an old woman in an old house. How could I have arranged these oddities? I don't know how, but you did. He clenched his fists. You've always been against me. You never thought I was worthy of your daughter. Orlando, please, Vanessa intervened. Let's just leave. There's something wrong here. And you're against me? Do you trust your mother over me? It's not that. I just don't want to stay. We'll go to a motel like everyone else. Orlando gave her a long look. Okay. Pack your bags. We're leaving. For the next half hour, the house was filled with hustle and bustle. Everyone was packing and loading things into cars. I watched with a sense of satisfaction. Fiona and her family were the first to leave, followed by Torben and Janina. Richard and Hilda expressed their disappointment to me. Finally, only Orlando and Vanessa were left. Mom, my daughter came up to me. I want to apologize for all this. Orlando shouldn't have done that. Don't worry, I replied. I realize you had nothing to do with his decisions. Orlando gave me one last angry look. You'll regret this, Eleanor. Regret what exactly? I asked innocently. That I took you all in without warning? Or that my house wasn't comfortable enough for your needs? He didn't answer, just grabbed his bag and walked out, slamming the door loudly. Vanessa paused, then hugged me. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Of course, honey. I stroked her back. Take care of yourself. As their car disappeared into the darkness, I went back into the house. The silence after a noisy family seemed like a blessing. I walked through the rooms, disabling the motion sensors, picking up my scattered belongings, and enjoying the return of tranquility to my home. My plan had worked perfectly. Not only had the Calloway family left my house, but it was unlikely they would ever want to return. More importantly, Orlando had learned a lesson that I was not to be treated like a disenfranchised old woman to be used at will. I smiled, remembering their frightened faces when the sensors in the garden went off. Perhaps it had been a little cruel, but they deserved that lesson. No one had the right to invade another's life uninvited. As I poured myself a glass of good wine, I thought of Vanessa. I felt bad that she was caught between two fires, but maybe this incident would make her reconsider her relationship with Orlando and his overbearing behavior. The morning after the Kellaway family's nighttime getaway was surprisingly quiet and sunny. I woke up at first light, as was my longtime habit. For a while, I just lay there, savoring the silence, which, after yesterday's noisy intrusion, seemed especially precious. No children's cries, no loud conversations, no demands or complaints, just birdsong outside the window and the slight rustle of leaves. Getting out of bed, I went to the window and opened it. The fresh morning air filled the room with the scent of my roses and the damp earth from the night's dew. My garden was mine alone again, and the thought of it filled me with a sense of deep satisfaction. I went down to the kitchen, put on the kettle, and began to prepare a simple but nutritious breakfast. Oatmeal with berries, toast with cheese, a cup of strong tea. No frills, no trying to impress anyone, just what I really liked. Over breakfast, I reflected on the previous day's events. The faces of the Callaways came to mind: smug Orlando, confused Vanessa, imperious Hilda, haughty Richard, fussy Fiona, and her uncontrollable children. How quickly their self-confidence was replaced by confusion and then outright fear. A few unusual sounds and inconveniences were enough to make their family tradition crumble like a house of cards. After breakfast, I decided to get busy tidying up the house. I had to turn off all the motion detectors, remove the stuffed owl from the closet, and return the bed linens to the house instead of the stiff and laundered ones. But first, I called Kathleen. "Good morning, Eleanor." Her voice sounded lively. "How was your night? Have your guests escaped yet?" I laughed. "They ran away in the evening before midnight. You should have seen their faces when that Indonesian music started playing in the garden." "Oh, I can imagine." Kathleen laughed too. "So your plan worked?" "Better than I expected. Not only did they leave, but they squabbled among themselves. Orlando had to admit that he lied to his family about inviting me." "Wow," Kathleen exclaimed. "A real revelation. And Vanessa, how did she react?" I sighed, remembering my daughter's confused face. She was embarrassed and upset. I guess this was the first time she'd seen her husband trying to manipulate not only her, but his entire family. Maybe this will make her reconsider her relationship with him? "I don't know," I answered honestly. Vanessa had always been inclined to forgive those she loved, but she promised to call me today, so maybe we'll have a chance to talk. We agreed that Kathleen and Gideon would stop by after lunch to help get the house back to normal and pick up their props. After the talk, I set about cleaning up. Strangely, cleaning up the traces of last night's trickery didn't make me feel tired or remorseful, but a light, almost playful mood, as if I'd just won a chess game against a worthy opponent. Although, to be honest, Orlando was hardly a worthy opponent, too arrogant, too confident in his ability to manipulate others. Toward noon, the phone rang. Vanessa's name popped up on the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my heartbeat, and answered it. "Hi, Mom." My daughter's voice sounded tired, but without last night's tension. "How are you?" "Fine, thanks," I replied. "How are you settling in? Did you find a hotel?" "Yeah, a motel in town. It wasn't the most luxurious place, but it was decent. The others stayed there too. And how was your night?" Vanessa sighed. "Frankly, not the best. Orlando was tossing and turning all night, muttering something about you setting it up on purpose." "That's an interesting theory," I said in a neutral tone. "And what did he think I had set up?" "Everything." I could hear a note of irritation in my daughter's voice. "Strange noises, plants that burn, bad food. He thinks you've been planning to run us out of the house from the start." I neither confirmed nor denied these accusations. "And you think that too?" The pause dragged on. Finally, Vanessa answered, "I don't know what to think, Mom. On the one hand, it sounds like paranoia. On the other, there are too many coincidences. And I've never heard those strange noises in your house before." "Old houses are full of surprises," I said philosophically. "Sometimes they only appear in the presence of certain people." "You sound like a psychic." A slight smile flashed in Vanessa's voice. "Anyway, I'm calling to say we're leaving tonight. The family reunion apparently didn't go well, and everyone's going home." "I understand." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "So what's going to happen next?" "What do you mean? With you, with Orlando, with your relationship with his family?" Yesterday's incident must have created some tension. Vanessa sighed again, deeper and heavier this time. "Yes, to put it mildly. Orlando's parents are very upset that he lied to them about your invitation. Torben and Fiona aren't happy either. They spent time and money on a trip that ended before it started. She hesitated. I'm upset too. About what exactly? I asked cautiously. Everything, Mom. There was desperation in her voice. Because Orlando called you and just put you on the spot. Because he lied to his family. Because I was caught between the two of you, not knowing who to believe or which side to take. Vanessa, I said softly, there's no need to choose sides here. This isn't about confrontation. It's about respect for other people, for their space, for their right to make decisions. There was silence. I could only hear her breathing on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice sounded thoughtful. You know, I've never seen that side of Orlando so clearly before. The way he just ignores the desires of others if they don't match his own. The way he manipulates people to get his way. I'd always put it down to his enthusiasm, his desire to organize everything in the best possible way. But now I'm not so sure. What if you're right? What if he really doesn't respect your boundaries or mine? I felt a pang of regret. Despite my dislike for Orlando, I didn't want my daughter to be unhappy. Vanessa, I can't tell you what to do with your marriage. It's your life and your choice. I can only share my experience. And my experience is that relationships without mutual respect are rarely happy in the long run. What am I supposed to do, Mom? There was a helplessness in her voice that I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. Talk to him, I advised, honestly and openly. Explain why his behavior upset you. Give him a chance to understand and change. And if he doesn't change, then you'll have to decide whether it's more important for you to keep this relationship as it is or find something that will bring you more respect and happiness. We talked some more. Then Vanessa said she had to go. Orlando was waiting for her to check out. I'll call you in a few days, okay? She said before hanging up. When things have calmed down a bit. Of course, darling. I'll be waiting for your call. After talking to Vanessa, I sat looking out the window at my garden for a long time. My thoughts revolved around her words, her doubts, her indecision. I remembered how I'd been like that myself years ago, always doubting, afraid to make life-changing decisions. Even when Raymond left us, I had long clung to the hope that he would come back, that our family would be together again. It took time to realize that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to let go of what isn't working and find the strength to move on. The reflection was interrupted by the doorbell ringing. It was Kathleen and Gideon, who had come to help clean up and pick up their things. Well, tell me the details, Kathleen demanded as soon as she crossed the threshold. How was the great exorcism of the Calloway family? I laughed and invited them into the kitchen. Over a cup of tea, I recounted last night in all its colorful details, from the salty coffee to the panic in the garden, from the exposure of Orlando's lies to the family's hasty flight. Bravo, Eleanor! Gideon exclaimed when I had finished. I've rarely seen such an elegant solution to a problem. No scandal, no direct confrontation, just creating the conditions in which they themselves decided to leave. And even better, they had a fight among themselves, Kathleen added. That's real skill. I smiled, accepting their compliments, but inside I felt a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, it felt good to know that my plan had worked so well. On the other, I couldn't help but think about Vanessa, about her confusion, about how this incident might affect her life. The three of us quickly cleaned up the house. Gideon disconnected and took away the motion sensors. Kathleen helped me change the linens in the guest rooms, and I removed the stuffed owl and other special interior details. By evening, my home was once again cozy and welcoming to those I really wanted to be guests. Before leaving, Kathleen gave me a big hug. You know, Eleanor, I admire you. You didn't just defend your home, you defended your independence, your right to live the way you want, not the way others want. It's inspiring. Her words touched me more deeply than I expected. After the neighbors left, I stood on the terrace for a long time, looking at the sunset sky and thinking about what had happened. Had I really done the right thing? Had I gone too far in my desire to teach Orlando and his family a lesson? And what would happen to my relationship with Vanessa now? I woke up the next morning with a feeling that something had changed, not just in my house or in my life, but in myself. It was as if yesterday's events had been the catalyst for an inner transformation that had been brewing for a long time. I decided to write a letter to Vanessa. Not an electronic one, but a real one, on paper, like they used to do in the old days. I pulled out the beautiful postage paper I kept for special occasions, sat down at the living room table, and began to write. Dear Vanessa, I am writing this letter to explain some things that are difficult to express in a phone conversation. First of all, I want you to know that I love you, always have and always will, no matter what. You are my greatest gift in this life, and nothing can change that. But love doesn't mean we have to accept everything our loved ones do. Sometimes love requires us to be honest, even when the truth may not be pleasant. What happened yesterday to Orlando and his family was no accident. Yes, I admit that I created certain conditions in the house that made their stay less comfortable. I didn't do it out of spite or revenge, but because I felt my boundaries were violated in the most cavalier way. All my life, I have learned to respect others' desires and boundaries, even to the detriment of my own. I put the needs of others, clients, coworkers, family, you, above my own. It wasn't until I retired, only after creating this little sanctuary for myself, that I began to realize how important it is to say no sometimes, how important it is to have a space that belongs only to you. When Orlando called and simply announced that they were coming as a family to visit me, without asking my consent, without inquiring about my plans or desires, I felt I had to do something. Not just put up with it like I've always done, but show that my opinion matters, that my home is my territory, not a free hotel for all comers. I don't expect you to understand or approve of my actions. Perhaps, from your point of view, I have done wrong, dishonestly, but I hope you will at least try to see the situation from my side. As for your relationship with Orlando, I can't and don't want to tell you what to do. It's your life, your choice. But I ask you to at least consider whether respect for you, for your desires, for your boundaries, is an integral part of your relationship. Because without mutual respect, love tends to wither like a flower without water. I will always be here for you, no matter what you decide. My home is always open to you, not by request, but by invitation based on mutual respect and love. Love, your mom. I reread the letter a few times, made minor corrections, then folded it neatly and put it in the envelope. I wasn't sure if I would send it. Maybe I needed those words more than Vanessa did. But the very act of writing them, of saying out loud, even on paper, what I was feeling, brought unexpected relief. I didn't hear from Vanessa for the next week. I didn't call her myself, determined to give her time and space to think. Instead, I focused on my life, working in the garden, reading books, going to the farmer's market with Kathleen, restoring an old dresser I found at the flea market. Strangely, instead of worry or anxiety, I felt a surprising calmness. It was as if something that had been weighing on me for a long time had finally broken free, allowing me to breathe fully. I didn't know how my relationship with Vanessa would play out in the future, but for the first time in a long time, I was confident in myself, in my values, in my right to my own space and respect. On the 8th day after the Kellaways' great escape, my phone rang late at night. It was Vanessa. Her voice was quiet but firm. Mom, I need to talk to you, not over the phone. I'll come over tomorrow if you don't mind. Of course, dear, I replied. I'll be waiting. As I hung up the phone, I felt my heart quicken. What does she want to say? Would she come alone or with Orlando? Would it be a reconciliation conversation or a final breakup? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. Whatever happened tomorrow, I knew I could face it with dignity and calm. I went out onto the terrace, sat in my favorite chair, and looked up at the stars twinkling in the dark sky. My whole life had been a road to this moment, the moment when I finally learned to stand my ground, to defend my space, to be myself without apology or compromise. And no matter what tomorrow brought, I had my house, my garden, my life that belonged only to me. And no one, not Orlando, not even Vanessa, could change that. With that thought, I drifted off to sleep, feeling strangely peaceful. The stars continued to shine, the world continued to turn, and I continued to be me, Eleanor Turvey, a 74-year-old woman who had finally learned to value her independence more than the approval of others.